Hello and welcome to Atomic Facepalm. This is Chris, and today it's how to fix the rules in Warhammer 40,000. Alright, so most people who follow Warhammer 40,000 might know that there's rumors of 10th edition coming in the summer of 2023. Not confirmed. This is just through rumor mongering, thread post, probably just random made up info. But for some reason, the 10th edition seems to be sticking right now, and it follows Games Workshop's typical 3-year cycles of resetting to new editions. If you're kind of new to this whole process, each edition is just a reiteration of the game where they kind of change the rules a little bit. Sometimes they change them a lot. For example, from 7th edition to 8th edition was a complete reset. So, in the vein of that, this video is more of a wish list. Like, hey, Games Workshop, this stuff would be really nice if we did it. Because right now, the game is growing more and more inaccessible to people. And that's a shame. When 8th edition kicked off, because of the reset, everything got very, very simple. It brought people into the hobby because there wasn't that big, scary bloat of rules. All the codexes were more or less even because of the indexes that came out. Indexes were just very bland, basic codexes that weren't really fleshed out. It was just books that had info on the factions in them until a proper codex was released later. And again, if you want to believe the rumors of 10th edition, it seems like that's probably what they're doing again. So as for the reasons why it's becoming more and more inaccessible, we're going to go over that in a bit here. And, you could also argue it's more expensive. I did a video on that recently. There's a lot of very powerful opinions. Whether or not the game is too expensive, most people think the same yes. Whether or not that's a vocal minority or whether or not that's a majority, who knows? But there are a lot of opinions there. So, first off, no matter what, the rules need to be free. And I'm talking all of the rules, not just the very basic ones where you can kind of like get an overall idea. I'm saying all the rules, the entire rulebook, make it free. You can still release a paid rulebook that's going to have art, lore, more information that isn't necessarily relevant to the gameplay. Great. I mean, people will still buy that. I will. I'm a sucker. I like that stuff. But make all the rules free. Make them downloadable. That instantly fixes a problem that people go into a store and they see this big, thick rulebook and they go, well, I'm not want to learn that. When in actuality, very little of that rulebook is rules. Release it as free. Market it that way, get people in. And the free rules, I would say, extends to terrain. It extends to, special stuff they release right now separately. Like, don't do that. Keep everything in one book right from the beginning. Make it accessible. And by book, again, I mean it could be like a PDF. Somewhere central where everybody can go to get all the rules at once for everything. The next one I think most people are going to agree on. Maybe not. Get rid of stratagems. They are annoying. There's too many of them. It bloats out the rules even more and more. It leads to analysis paralysis. You then are put in a weird situation where, let's say we're having even a friendly game of 40K. Okay, my rulebook has all these stratagems. There is no way my opponent is going to have the time or the inclination to go through my codex, memorize all of my stratagems, and then respond accordingly. And what happens is, it creates unnecessary friction. So, let's say, again, we're playing a friendly game. I have my units go out here. All of a sudden, I run this stratagem. And my opponent's like, wait, you're doing what? I didn't know you could do that. And then it's just like, well, I want to do it because it's my stratagem, because it's fun for me. Then the other person feels kind of unfairly treated because like, well, I didn't know you could do that. And that then means we have to, like, every turn before I do something, say, okay, I'm going to do this, but wait, I could also play a stratagem. Oh, you're doing that, but wait, I could play the stratagem. It sucks. It's like, it just slows the game down. Everyone gets irritated. No one wants to have like a billion cards laid out. We don't want to play Magic the Gathering while we're playing Warhammer 40K, even though there is actually a pretty cool crossover. Anyway, but we don't want to do them at once, is what I'm saying. So get rid of stratagems. And that's not to say you can't have some of the stuff stratagems do. They did that in the past in other editions. It's just they included most of those in the unit entries. And it would be like a once per game ability, or it would be something similar. So You're like, oh, my striking scorpions are going into attack, and now part of the unit profile could say once per game they get an extra attack or something like that. That's so much easier. It's easier to reference. It's easier for everyone to ingest and comprehend. And if your opponent wanted to, they could go through your codex like, oh, okay, yep, okay, here. Simple. Just put them back in the unit entries, pare them down, because everyone knows most of the strategies are kind of crappy, and there's some that are just like absurdly powerful. Get rid of them. Speaking of absurdly powerful, this one is more of a gray area, but I'm going to put it in here anyway. I personally think first turn is still way overpowered. Not always. There are occasions where it's actually better to go second, but for the most part, if you get first turn, you're doing a ton of damage. And again, the whole idea of this game is to have fun. If your opponent goes first, nukes half of your army off the board, it's not fun. I mean, maybe some people get a kick out of that. I guess you're playing like a horde army, like orcs or Tyranids. It's not that big a deal. But for most other factions, it kind of is. So how do we fix that? Well, glad you didn't ask, Games Workshop. 1, you could bring back Seize the Initiative. That's where we used to roll a d6, and then if you rolled a 6, you would actually steal the first turn from the opponent. That's like a kind of a clumsy way to do it, but at least it added that chance that you could possibly go first. Another way is through the very, very older codexes, they had this thing called night fighting, and it usually gave benefits to the defender. Like it could provide a bonus to the recover save. It could limit the range of the shooting. It could just maybe it could take some of the sting away from that person going first, not making it unfun. Like the person who goes first could still have a little bit of power, but it just makes the defender more survivable without having to like pack them behind one line of sight blocking terrain, which just feels weird. You could, I know this is getting a little crazy, you could also introduce reactions. Maybe not to the scale of a game like Infinity where it's like this player goes, that player goes, this player goes, that player goes, this guy, maybe not to that scale. That's more like for skirmish games. Maybe be like 1 or 2 reactions you could do if your opponent goes first. Maybe something that's pretty strong. Like you'd be like, oh, I'm playing this reaction, so I don't know, I get +2 to my cover saves or something. So I know that's getting closer to stratagems, but maybe we just say first turn only. If you're a defender, you get this. And the next one, I'm actually not too sure of my own point here, but I think it would help. Get rid of command points. This one's tough because I actually kind of like command points personally, but they tie too closely into stratagems. Obviously, you need command points to use stratagems. And command points don't feel very fair. Warhammer is not a fair game. We're going to get that. I'm going to say that many times in this video. Warhammer is not fair, but there are ways to make it a little bit more fair. One way is no stratagems. One other way is no command points. So you could keep the stuff you need command points for, right? And still kind of keep that element. So you could have Insane Bravery, where you still pass your morale automatically. You could have Overwatch. You could have command rerolls. Maybe just make them again once per turn, once per round. So let's say once per player turn, you get a reroll of any type. Simple. Once per player round, you can play Insane Bravery. Just do it that way, and then it's more uniform throughout. And maybe for some factions, you could give them bonuses depending on what fits the lore. Like Eldar might get maybe a boost to their psychic powers. Imperial Guard might get a boost to maybe more rerolls, so you have so many shots coming in. Something like that. I don't know what goes on inside of Games Workshop. I'm not an employee there. I've never worked there. I've heard rumors. I think they do play test their games, but I think it's very, very small based on what we're seeing, because there are sometimes, like with the Leagues of Votann, where these rules updates come out before the codex even releases, which is really, really awkward and kind of a bad look. So, play test stuff thoroughly. Don't just do it inside the studio. Invite trusted community members, or heck, even random community members, to go along the testing with you. Maybe that's happening right now, and maybe they're just under NDA and can't say that. If so, good. That's a step in the right direction. But I'm not sure it needs to be under NDA. Well, it probably does, because they don't want to release, codex info. Fine, whatever. Just test the rules, test them thoroughly, and don't release them too early. I know Games Workshop has this habit of we've got to get this stuff out now to make money. But you're going to make more money if the rules don't change all the time. And you can gather more community feedback that way. You can then adjust everything before going to the printer and then making people either mark out the changes in their codex or have to print out something aside from whatever else you're dealing with. The rules right now, I think, largely reflect just sort of like pushing everything out at once and not really testing it and kind of just letting the people see how they do in tournaments or even in like non-competitive play. And they're like, oh, okay, now we'll fix it. That's not good. Don't do that. And this kind of ties into my next point, which is stop releasing so many points and rules updates. For seasoned players, such as myself, other YouTubers, other pretty influential folks, we're talking like mini wargaming, those guys, like the people who have been around forever and have a lot of sort of clout in this industry, you can see it's frustrating for them too. When there's all these rules coming in, even for people who are used to the game, it's not fun. And it is often confusing because a lot of the rules updates contradict other rules that also came out recently. And then you're in the middle of a game you're playing, you're like, well, what do we do now? You can always make a gentleman's agreement or general person's agreement, depending on who you're playing with. But again, that takes you out of the game. And all of a sudden, instead of having fun, you're debating rules that conflict with each other. So just test them, right? If we go back to my last point, where you're testing everything thoroughly, you don't have to release this many rules updates. You could also just set a time frame, which I think they did before. Every 6 months, we release a rules update. 6 months later, a rules update. At least then it's on a timeline, and we all know what to expect, and we all know what's coming. But just like throwing them out there, and sometimes they're available, sometimes they're not. There was a while, about a month ago, where the rules on Games Workshop's community page were not available. Like, what do you do then? Like, I don't know. I also hope, and this is like a pipe dream, it's probably never going to happen. I really hope they stop releasing all these ancillary extra rules for competitive play in separate books. That sucks. So, for example, they've got these grand tournament books. If you don't get those on pre-order, you don't buy them right when they come out, you're out of luck, man. Like, I tried buying the newest one. I couldn't get it on eBay. I couldn't get it from friends who own gaming stores. Like, the only choice for me was basically to, like, I don't know, talk to other people who have it, borrow it from somebody. That is not good. So if you're a competitive player, you have to get that because it kind of releases like fixes. Again, we're going back to all these micro fixes they're releasing. But also it just kind of releases cool new like mats. It releases new ways to play that look fun. But I can't get my hands on it. And that's a big issue. They're going to keep doing it because it's Games Workshop. And unfortunately, they have this habit of just like bombarding us on microtransactions. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll learn. Power level and points. I think Games Workshop should keep power level. I think it's a really good way to get people who are new to the hobby in without having to worry too much about like dealing with points. Because points you can always deal with later. And power level is very simple. It's not balanced at all. It's like way unbalanced. But again, just like getting people to get their models in a tabletop, power level is very, very good and it's quick. I would encourage them not to mess with that. However, what I would like to see is putting points back into the unit entries. Don't make us have to go to the back of the book, search around there, go back to the unit entry, reference what the war gear is, go back to the back of the book. No, just put the points there. You're not going to like use up any more space than you're already using. It might make the unit entries a little bit bigger. So what? At least now we have everything on one little spot that's easily referenced. How many of you love damage brackets? No, not me. I think damage brackets on vehicles and monsters was a pretty cool idea. Like when I first heard they were doing that in 8th, I was like, that's awesome. It's like your stuff degrades over time. And it feels like the more battle damage they take, the more rough it is. And you gotta be more like tactical. And to a certain point, that's true. The problem I have discovered is that damage brackets are all over the place depending on the faction. Some damage brackets, believe it or not, help the unit that's getting hurt. Which again, it's a cool idea in theory. It does not work that well. So you could have like a Space Marine Rhino that takes damage and it degrades you like you'd expect. Gets slower. It can't shoot as good. Okay, fine. But then you could have like, I don't know, Gazkul Thraka for the orcs who gets more attacks the more he gets hurt. And again, it's like that's cool. I like the idea. But if you're comparing them, you're like, well, wait a minute. My Rhino gets hurt and it's useless. Your guy gets hurt and he gets better. I don't think that's working well. Plus, let's just be honest, when your stuff gets to be the point where it's in that low damage bracket, it's not fun. It's just plain not fun. You have a unit that is effectively useless on the battlefield. I think they had the right idea here, and maybe they shouldn't get rid of it entirely. Maybe they could just bring back, like, I don't know, a universal monster or vehicle damage table. Maybe something that kind of harkens back to 5th and 6th edition, where you have like penetrating hits, glancing hits. Maybe do something like that, where it's just one centralized bracket that fits everybody else's stuff. And you could always have some exceptions here and there. I do think it is kind of cool that like certain demon models or orc models get like bonuses as they get hurt. It's funny, but make that the exception rather than the norm. And I think, again, the more we can consolidate things into one spot, the better. Because that way, too, you could be like, well, I know when my opponent's stuff gets damaged, this will happen. I know when my stuff gets damaged, it's going to be the same thing, barring maybe the 2% in other codexes with that one unit that doesn't. It's easily digestible. And again, I think that's what we need to do with 10th edition. Make it easier for people to understand, make it smoother to play the game. And let's simplify force and organizational and detachment requirements. That's a mouthful. So let me break this down. Right now, it's like you have to spend command points to buy different, like, I don't know, I'm trying to put this in very layman's terms. So let's say you want a brigade attachment, etc., or you want some type of detachment that fits into certain unit types. I have to have, like, however many troops choices. I have to have an HQ slot. You have to fit all these requirements. Fine, that's always been a part of Warhammer. But the way you have to use command points to purchase those, the way some take away command points, the way it refunds some command points, it's just like confusing and wildly unnecessary. So I think there are some parts of this that make sense. Limiting super heavies is probably a good idea when you're in competitive / tournament play because, having like 6 Bane Blades face off against you is rough. So there is something there about saying maybe we just penalize you a little bit somehow if you're going to bring like a ton of super heavies or a bunch of Lords of War. That's fine. But they need to make it easier. Take away the command points, like I said before. Make it so you just have very basic organizational charts broken down. I don't have a clear thought here, and I'm sort of struggling. To me, it's a bit annoying that when I'm trying to build my forces, it's like I have to deal with command points too on top of points, and then going back to like other books you have to purchase that have extra rules in them. Oh, now, unlike before, if I want to take a warlord trait or I want to take a relic, now those cost points too, or command points. Oh my God, guys, like this is getting to the point where it's just silly. Get rid of all that stuff. Simplify it. Speaking of simplifying, ditch keywords. Like keywords, there are so many keywords at the bottom of each little unit faction, or each little unit entry rather, that it's dizzying. And it's like so confusing to be like, oh, well, this keyword belongs to this thing, but not that thing. And we also have core units on top of that. Well, these are core and these aren't. And you've got keywords like, please stop that. Just make them what they are. You could say, when this happens, troops are affected. When this happens, elites are affected. When this happens, heavy spur is affected. Just keep it that way. There's no reason to overcomplicate things. It worked in past editions. You could tweak it a little bit. Let's maybe get back to that. This one is a personal gripe of mine. I loved independent characters in other editions before 8th. The idea was you had a character, or maybe like a hero unit, and you could run it by itself, or you could join it with another unit in the game or before deployment, and it became part of that unit. It then couldn't leave that unit unless like every other model was destroyed besides that unit. So there were advantages and there were disadvantages to that. That needs to happen again. I have a really big problem thematically and just fluff-wise and competitive-wise. Let me give you a solid example. I have Karandras, who, for those who don't know, is the Phoenix Lord for the Striking Scorpions in the Eldari. Let's say I have a unit of 12 Striking Scorpions. They charge into a unit. Great, they got in. Now I have to roll separately for Karandras, and there's a chance that could fail, and that feels really stupid. It's like I'm sending all my Striking Scorpions in. The Phoenix Lord, who is like the best Striking Scorpion, then might not run in with them. He's just off having a cup of tea, or like just reading the paper or something. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll get there in a little bit, guys. Or he could run in, The other striking scorpions fail their charge. It's just like, that is what's happening here. Some people write it off as, well, that's the tides of war. It's crazy. No, I'm sorry. It's stupid. Like that caliber of a hero or character would stay with the unit, whether they get blown up, whether they all charge in, whatever. It's not going to just like sit off to the side and just do nothing. I hate that. So maybe in the 10th edition, we bring back some type of independent character rule that's sort of simple like that. Just says, you can run it on its own, or it can join to a unit, and then, there are advantages and disadvantages. Maybe if it's part of that unit, it can now obviously take wounds or mortal wounds with the rest of the unit. It loses the lookout sir ability. It's so easy to fix that, and it would make it so much better. Like, no one wants to have Gilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, with his tactical troops sitting behind while they run in. Maybe if you want to do it on purpose, fine, don't join with that unit. But if the intent is that Gilliman is going to charge the Ultramarines, that should always happen. Like, come on, guys. Most importantly, of all the points I'm bringing up here, I want them to bring back universal special rules, and I want those in the main rulebook. For those that don't know, in past editions, you'd have a section, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, where it would just tell you what the special rules are. For example, rather than having in the Death Guard Codex say, disgustingly resilient, revolting resilient, blah, 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 blah. It was just called Feel No Pain. Easy. And then every single codex, you just look in the low unit entry and say, oh, what rules does this unit have? Oh, it has Feel No Pain. Everyone knows what that is. You don't have to worry about a bazillion different ways to phrase it. It gets clumsy. I want universal special rules back. You don't have to have a million of them. You could have Objective Secured. You could have, again, Feel No Pain. You could have the old Eternal Warrior. Work that in somehow. You could have all these things in one spot. Most people can memorize a small amount, or you just have that book open to the Universal Special Rules page. Simple. Now, they went a little crazy with this in some editions where there's hundreds of Universal Special Rules. Don't do that. But just keep all the ones that are already in every unit entry anyway and just name something different. Make those one thing easily accessible. You're probably seeing that theme here a lot. And I think it's pretty easy to adjust Universal Special Rules, so plus or minus. So let's say you want to have a Feel No Pain that was 5+, but maybe you wanted to give a hero unit Feel No Pain that was 4+. Well, just make it Feel No Pain 1, Feel No Pain 2. You don't have to get that complicated with it. You can retain the essence of what these rules are. Just make it so you can look at them all at once. And with that, there's my rant/wish list. I do want to point out this, I don't want this to be a negative video. Maybe I'm coming off that way, because I still love the game. I really do. And even with the state of affairs, which is pretty bleak on a rules front, it's still a lot of fun to play. This is my way as just a fan, a community member saying, this stuff would be really nice if we could just simplify it again. We had it briefly in sort of the late stages of 8th edition. Everything just kind of worked pretty well. Yeah, it wasn't that complicated, but boy, was it easy and fun to play a game, and you didn't have all this confusing stuff going with it. I would love to get back there again. And, maybe they're doing that. We shall see. What do you guys think? Let me know. And until next time, good luck. Have fun.